We are counting down the months to Election Day. That's right, local elections are upon us. But what if I told you that in many municipalities across America, a handful of voters will decide who runs their city or township or county? That's right, in many parts of throughout the country, less than 5% of the population will decide who their leaders are. So why is voter turnout so low in local elections? Is there anything we can do to increase it? We're joined by politics reporter Tom Shurtell to talk about those questions and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. The election season is upon us. Believe it or not, there are elections every year in the United States. And we don't just vote for president or the Senate or the Congress or governors, but for judges and township supervisors, commissioners, mayors, controllers, prothonotary, and the list goes on and on. So who are these people that serve at the local government level? And why does turnout become so low during local elections? Is there anything we can do to increase it? We're joined by politics reporter Tom Shurtell from LehighValleyNews.com to talk about these issues. Tom, welcome back to Face the Issues. Thanks so much for being here.
It's good to be back.
Yeah. Our viewers will remember you from a few seasons ago. You're at that time with the Allentown Morning Call covering local government. You're now with LehighValleyNews.com, still covering government, local governments. And here in the Lehigh Valley, covering some of the federal stuff that goes on here. And let me just start with some statistics as we get into this. When we look at federal races versus these local races, right? And in politics, we always talk about, there's these 1 of 4 voters. Every 4 years, they vote one time. They vote president. Sometimes you get these 2 of 4 voters that vote for Congress and then the governor and then president. But in 2003, I found this statistic to be super interesting. In 2003, in the Fort Worth mayoral race. So Fort Worth, Texas is the 4th largest city in Texas, the 12th largest city in the United States. The mayor is Mattie Parker. And of 978,468 people in the city, now not all of them are registered voters, but that's the population, 43,450 votes were cast, which means 4.44% of the city voted. Again, not all of those were registered voters who could vote. You have children, you have immigrants, things like, or non-citizens, things like that. But that's less than 5% of a city's population deciding who's going to run the city. She won with a substantial part of the vote, but if you take her vote, that means only 3.078% of the city voted for their mayor. This is the 12th largest city in the United States of America. There's an organization that looked at voter turnout in the late 2010s, 2018, 2019, and they're looking at where turnout is high on mayoral races. And Bradenton, Florida was the highest in their last mayoral race with 47% turnout. Lexington, Kentucky was at 42%. Goes down, Columbus, Ohio is on here at 30%, Duluth, Minnesota at 28%. But in that lowest percentage turnout, Fort Worth, Texas, we just talked about. State College, Pennsylvania, only 9%. Las Vegas, only 9%. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, 12%. We talk a lot about voter turnout being low in presidential years when we compare it to like prime minister votes in Britain. But this is abysmally low. Why does it drop so much when we come to a local election cycle?
There's a lot to unpack there. And let's start with the obvious ones. People know, like if you're running for president, you have theoretically, a pretty large base supporting you. You need to be on the ball in all these different states, which means that you've got hundreds of thousands, millions of supporters potentially. You also need to be able to raise significant amounts of money, and you can't do that without name recognition. So part of it is just fame, people knowing who you are and what you want to do. When you get to some of these local races, if you want to be a borough councilman in Roseto, Pennsylvania, you have you need a few hundred people to know who you are and to support you. You have a much smaller pool and a much if you're well liked and known in the community, then that's one thing. But a lot of times, if you're just I want to be involved, and this is my idea of how I'm going to be involved, I'll run for local government, then oftentimes that's your first opportunity to introduce you to these people, to your neighbors, to voters, and they don't know who you are yet. Yeah. So if you look at the ballot, or you do your homework and you look at the ballot ahead of time, and you don't know any of the names on it, well, you're less incentivized to show up and to vote for these people. Part of it also has to do with the politics of the situation. In some of those, like Las Vegas you mentioned, there's a lot of people living in Las Vegas who are not necessarily residents of Las Vegas. They may be they may be there for a show. They may be there on a job. They're not residents. They're not registered to vote there. So they're part of the population, but they're in some regards transient. So they're not going to be voting in races like that. In some other municipalities, it might be heavily lopsided in terms of voter registration. So Pennsylvania, we don't, especially here in the Lehigh Valley, we don't see that as much. But if you're in a deep red state or a deep blue state, the race was probably determined in the primary. And so when you go to vote on election day, which is, I assume, what they're looking at in those statistics, the race was decided months ago. Like it's not done yet, but it's at this point it's all but a formality. If you live in a location that is 80% Democrat or 80% Republican, odds are if you're in the minority, you're going to have a bad day on election day.
Every time.
Yeah. Like you could be a great candidate. It's just that it's probably not working out for you. So there's a ton of different factors that can influence turnout. And also, some of it has to do with your ability to learn about it. So the first thing I mentioned was people don't know who you are. One way that a lot of these politicians build up recognition is they're getting covered by national media. So you know who Donald Trump is. You know who Josh Shapiro is. You know who Gavin Newsom is because they're on every cable network and being broadcast into homes across the country. You're probably not getting invited onto CNN if you're running for dog catcher. Your ability to connect on those massive media outlets aren't there. And we've seen local media kind of tail off in the last few decades. And there are less reporters covering local races, making it harder for people to stay informed about what's happening in their own neighborhoods.
Tom, let me ask you about that, because you dedicate your career to local journalism very effectively too. There's this, to your point, a lot of local journalism is dying. There are papers that are trailing off, and a lot of municipalities aren't covered directly by a local news station or a local paper. Is that contributing to people not always knowing what their local government is doing, or is it vice versa, that there's an apathy about local government, and thus these journalism organizations, these newspapers, just they're not getting the buy-in from the community, or is it kind of a little bit of both and one's feeding the other?
It's a little bit of both, and I think there's something else going on there too. It's that the media landscape has shifted dramatically. There's so many other options about where you're going to get your information or how you're going to invest your free time. I wasn't born back in the 70s, but I've pulled up old microfilms of what the local papers looked like back in the 1970s, and it was practically a book that you're pulling out there. You have advertisements from every local retailer. It's before the internet, so if you want to reach your customer base, you are really limited options. You might be able to get something on local television, but depending on what market you're in, there may not be a local television network.
Right.
You might get something from a big city hundreds of miles away, but you don't have a ton of other options other than back in, say, like I said, the 70s, these papers. And some of them, these communities had multiple options to invest in. Here in the Lehigh Valley, you had the Globe Times in Bethlehem, you had the Easton Express, you had the Morning Call, you had 3 viable daily newspapers, each competing, each with their own coverage and strengths and weaknesses. And so, like, you had options on what you're going to do and where you're going to advertise, where you're going to get your news. You could get both and compare and see who's got the scoop and whatnot. And there were teams of journalists. Like I've heard stories from senior colleagues of mine where they would come in to start their evening shift and they would have to stand around and wait for because there weren't enough desks. Like they would share the desks because that was what the demand was so high. And back then, the evening paper was a big deal. That's not the case anymore. The Express Times in Easton, the first paper that I started working at here in Lehigh Valley, they're about to end print publication. Social media has warped everything, not necessarily in a bad way, but there certainly have been negatives, and people aren't looking to these traditional news outlets for information like they did even a decade ago.
Yeah. Does that make local government a little bit out of sight, out of mind for voters?
It does, because as the shift has gone away from the local outlets, as they've struggled to adapt to this, we've seen growth at the national level. So your CNN, your Foxes, the main networks, it's a little bit different because there's more competition for them, but they're still big and healthy. But they're trying to reach a broad audience. They're not necessarily interested into digging into Northampton County or Allentown or what have you. So sometimes they show up. We had 60 Minutes focusing on the Lehigh Valley's congressional race because it was of national interest. But that doesn't happen very often.
And they're not going to come for the dog catcher race.
Exactly. Right. So it kind of falls by the wayside. And at the same time, people might have been heavily invested in their local communities, partly because there wasn't a ton of other entertainment options in the past. Like you couldn't get on the computer, you couldn't get on your computer and communicate with anyone in the world.
No Netflix and shit like
right. You'd go down to your VFW and or the Lions Club and be involved that way and give back to your community. And local politics, like. Now, some people kind of use it as a form of entertainment. Back then, the only way to be entertained by it was to get involved, and so people would. And so it's a lot different than it used to be, and because there's more options, more avenues to be engaged, I feel like there's more competition for people's attention, and local political races, local offices are not faring well in that competition.
Well, that makes sense. Tom, we're going to go to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about what the importance of local government is, and then some of maybe the names and offices that people aren't that familiar with, and try to maybe educate and create a little bit of buzz around these local elections.
Definitely.
So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand. Or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device or go to our website for more information. Visit lighthousetv.org to stay connected. There you can find out what's currently on the air and coming up, how to watch in your area on cable, satellite, broadcast, or streaming devices. Watch past programs or our live stream. Follow us on social media and learn more about the station, our hosts, and our programming. Lighthouse TV, positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Tom, we left off talking about how times have shifted and a lot focus, even for local people, has shifted toward national issues, national elections, things like that. Obviously, you and I both believe local government is incredibly important, and you've covered it for so long. Can you help us understand why it's so important? Perhaps theoretically, but also, is there something you've seen through your career where you can look to and say, no, like this is exactly why we need local government?
No, definitely. One of the first things that I moved into the Valley back in 2010, and on the ballot that year was a referendum question. What should Northampton County do with its nursing home? At the time, it was losing a lot of money, but it was also, like traditionally, it was a poorhouse. It was where people could go and be treated with dignity at the end of their life when they were ill and didn't necessarily have anyone to take care of them. Other counties had ditched them, and so it wouldn't have been alone in that. But there was this overwhelming response that we needed to save Graysdale. We need to save the nursing home. And so there are these issues that pop up that are centrally located to our identity, our culture, what we're about, our values, and that really comes through at the local level. And so, like I said, about how we're going to spend our money, how we're going to educate our children, how we're going to keep our community safe, what that looks like, whether that's kind of a throw the book at people or treating people with or treating people with some form of mercy if they're making mistakes. There are, and some of it comes down to the bedrock of democracy. Yeah. I mean, you don't think about it this way, but in Pennsylvania, the counties run local elections. So when, even for the national races, it's your neighbors, it's the people in local office that are there to ensure the integrity of these results. And so when you see national politicians accusing people of doing things wrong, like those are your neighbors. You shouldn't just be invested in it because it's your politician or not. You should be invested in it because that is reflecting on your community, for good or for bad. If people are doing something wrong, that needs to be addressed at the local level to ensure the election integrity. And if it's nonsense, then you ought to be sticking up for people in your communities. So like there's all sorts of different things. Policing, like I said, tax rates for the most part. The biggest chunk of your tax bill is your school district, your municipality. Yes, you do pay federal and state taxes, but it's from a larger pool. And so there's a lot at stake in these local races.
And to your point, we talk so much, or you hear people talk so much about not wanting the federal government to control everything and not wanting the federal government to really press down on our rights. And this is, the founders designed this for states and local governments, regional governments to have a substantial chunk of power. And by not voting, it's almost like you're passing that power up. And so to your point, as bedrock of democracy, local government was specifically designed to exist as a way of guarding against democracy. And so, Tom, I want to get into some of these offices here. I think there's some that are fairly self-explanatory. County executives, executive branch at the county level, county councils, commissioners, different places call them different things, mayors, things like that. But I want to ask you. So, in not just Pennsylvania, I mean, in states across the country, you hear different terms. So some municipalities have mayors and city councils, and some have boards of supervisors, others have commissioners. And what is all of that? And who are these people? What do they do?
It depends on the level that we're talking about. So let's focus on, say, a city like Allentown. Allentown has a mayor who holds the executive authority. They oversee day-to-day operations of government. They control the workforce, but it's the city council who directs spending and kind of sets the policy. So if you're thinking about the city as a business, the mayor is your CEO and the council is your board of trustees. They're supposed to provide the vision in theory, and the mayor is there to execute on that vision. They don't always see eye to eye, and sometimes things can get interesting, particularly in local election years. But that is theoretically how that goes. But there's all, and that for the most part holds true even when you change levels. But the jobs and duties assigned to them shifts at that point. So you're at the municipal level, you're going to have people in charge of police, zoning. You're going to be in if there might be some like development responsibilities. That sounds boring. It sounds tedious, but it's essential.
Yeah.
Like here in the
100%.
Lehigh Valley, we've seen a tremendous amount of warehouses developed. But that has been allowed even when people don't want it because of zoning laws on the books. And so if you're angry about all these trucks or warehouses or other types of development that you don't like, well, that's a local government issue. At the same time, if you move up a level to say county government, that is a lot of where your human services are being taken care of. Where if, God forbid, children need to be removed from a home because it's unsafe, that's county government doing that. It's being in Pennsylvania, it's funded by the state, but it's the county that is executing on that. It's also the county's also in charge of overseeing elections. They're in charge of. Pennsylvania gives counties rights to ensure that weights and measures. So if you're going to fill up your gas tank and you're buying it by the gallon, well, how do you know that gallon of gas is actually a gallon as opposed to 3/4 of a gallon? There's someone in the government going around making sure that's being done, and around here it's county government doing that. The county government also controls the courts. So if you were appearing for a divorce hearing or if you've been charged with a crime, that is county government that is overseeing that judicial process. If you are imprisoned for a crime or for being accused of a crime, you are a ward. You are a ward of the county at that point. So there's in the townships, we're talking about different titles. Some of it's a little bit different. Sometimes those executive powers and legislative powers are combined into one. That it would be those township commissioners or supervisors that we were talking about.
Okay. The other one I want to ask you about, clerk of courts, prothonotary, a lot of fancy names that really come down to a same role, recorder of deeds, things like that. But we see them on ballots, and sometimes no one runs for them. But what does like a clerk of courts do? Like what's the actual role that people are voting for?
Sure, and it's not in every county, mind you.
Right.
Most of them, there's a position like this, but not all of them. And these are people that are tasked with kind of ensuring that the paperwork with all these court systems is on track and being filed and can be available to the public as appropriate. Because like if you think about how much goes into a single lawsuit, there's tons and tons and tons of paperwork, and that paper trail is critical for the courts to actually function. And because it is such an essential task, a long time ago it was decided to make that an elected position, even though it's kind of like behind the scenes, like it's not necessarily a political office per se. It's a professional office, might be viewed as today. Like it's still elected in many places. A handful have made that a professional appointed position, but yeah, they're in charge of basically ensuring that the treads of the court are in motion and where they need to be.
And Tom, you just brought something up. Like some counties, not just Pennsylvania, but across the country, have certain offices they vote for, and other ones they don't, and that varies, right? In most of Pennsylvania, solicitors are appointed. In Texas, for example, they're elected. They're called county attorneys, so district attorneys. And so when somebody's voting locally, they can't just go to a national site and figure out what their positions are. Where should people go to figure out who's even going to be on the ballot?
Generally speaking, you can go to your counties. They should have, by the appropriate point in time, essentially like a practice ballot. It's not an official one, but it's on the website, and you can look at and see who is running for these offices. It's also should be covered in your local media outlets.
LehighValleyNews.com.
LehighValleyNews.com. I'm a little biased, but yeah. So like we haven't published it yet.
Sure.
But it may be soon. Basically a running list of all the offices out there and who's running for them, if they're an incumbent or not, their political party, if it applies. In some of these offices, like school board, like you can cross-file.
Right.
They're theoretically nonpartisan offices. In this day and age, doesn't always work out that way.
Right.
But like that's. But yeah, so that's an opportunity to get the basics about who is running for what offices, and then ideally, as you get closer to the election, there should be information out there either from the candidates themselves or from local media about what it is they hope to accomplish in office if elected.
Yeah, so it's not a secret what offices are up. You can get that information from your county government.
Yes, definitely, yeah, and because the county governments run the elections, yeah.
That's great. Tom, thank you so much. We're going to go to break, so don't go away. We'll be right back.
Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand, or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website lighthousetv.org for more information. Lighthouse TV, positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Tom, thanks again for joining us. Closing out, we always like to get to know our guests a little better. And in your time at the Morning Call, you wrote a column about streets and roads. And my understanding is you're about to step back into that role at your new location.
Yeah, so my main job is I'm a politics reporter at LehighValleyNews.com, but we are working on a special project. And I'm going to be doing a Road Scholar newsletter, and this spring we're going to be unveiling a special project looking at road safety, traffic trends, and a number of other transportation-related matters, and a big project.
So you've done this before, and how excited are you to walk back into this? I know you spent your career covering politics and local government, things like this, but how excited are you to kind of walk into this? Is it a breath of fresh air? Is it a guy sit in traffic now? Like how are you feeling?
So I'm feeling good about it, and it's funny, like I've realized recently that I've dedicated most of my career to covering two things that most people hate: traffic and politics. And so, but everyone has a strong opinion about both of them, and it's particularly for traffic. And so people hate it, and they have strong opinions, and they want it fixed. And I really love that energy. Like I've gotten already like so many emails and feedback from things that people want taken care of or want looked into.
That's super cool. People can follow along at LehighValleyNews.com.
Yes.
Well, Tom, best of luck. We'll have you back to talk about that when it starts.
Excellent. We're looking forward to it.
Great. Thanks again. My thanks to Tom Shortell for joining us, and of course my thanks to each of you for tuning in as well. We hope to see you again right back here next week. Until then, my name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.